As we move through this course, we hope to build a foundation in which you can create dynamic inquiries. Using sources and evidence is a big part of that. This week, we are going to take another close look at the C3 inquiry arc, focusing in on Dimension 3. It is in this dimension that students start to craft an initial argument or claim using evidence they've collected. Let's begin with gathering and evaluating sources. Whether students are responding to a compelling or supporting question, they will need to support their answers with information from sources they encounter. You could collect these materials in advance, or you could give students the opportunity to collect their own. The Smithsonian and other museums offer you and your students access to a variety of sources. Let's take a look at the Smithsonian site, History Explorer. You'll notice on the home page there are all sorts of things to engage your students. There's a featured artifact, featured resources. If you look up in the corner, there's a search browser. You could type in John Brown, click search, and it would come up with all sorts of resources you might be able to use in your classroom. The first one that pops up is a lesson plan. It takes about 90 minutes and it has all sorts of images of John Brown, pictures of John Brown going to his death, images of replicas of the weapons that he used, including a rifle, a pike, and even a revolver, and a video with an actor depicting John Brown on trial. The C3 framework encourages teachers to think broadly about the type of sources that would help students answer a question. In history, this becomes increasingly important, as students should be encouraged to read and consider what professional historians have said about the questions they are exploring. At the same time, students need to develop skills in reading and analyzing historical sources that can be used as evidence in supporting an argument about the past. Historical sources include things like written documents, but also things like objects, artistic works, and oral accounts. As your students encounter this wide variety of sources, I encourage you to give them opportunities to evaluate these sources for relevancy. This includes a close look at the origin, structure, context, and corroborative value of the sources, and the way in which it contributes to the question. If the inquiry question is, what was the legacy of John Brown, the most helpful source might be the video. This is a secondary source that historians scripted to investigate John Brown's legacy. The weapons could be used in Dimension 1 to spur a little curiosity, or in Dimension 2 to understand the Harper's Ferry attack. Additionally, students should evaluate the sources for credibility. This includes a close look at the veracity of the source, including whether the source can be trusted. In history, we often look at the perspective of the individual or groups of individuals who created the source. As students approach a historical source, they will want to keep in mind that historical understanding requires the recognition of multiple points of view and that perspectives change over time. This means that students will have to develop a sense of empathy with people in the past whose perspectives are quite different from those of today. On the Smithsonian's History Explorer website, the education team has helped structure the work of evaluating sources. For example, take a look at the lesson, John Brown's Legacy. Within this lesson, there is a short background essay that provides historical context on John Brown. As students sort the sources, the museum provides a guide for closely examining those sources. Within the guide, students are asked to consider the form of the source, what the source tells the reader, and how the source is related to the larger inquiry. In this way, the guide is setting a foundation for helping students consider the credibility of the historical source they're using. The second section of Dimension 3 focuses on students constructing claims toward the ultimate goal of building arguments. In contrast to opinions and explanations, argumentation involves the ability to understand what we call the source-to-evidence relationship. I have found that argumentation work that students do is initially often pretty tentative. You will need to work with your students to delve more deeply into the available sources so that they can refine those claims and counterclaims that they're making. For example, imagine that your students are working with the question, What was John Brown's legacy? Your students might begin with the claim that John Brown was a madman. Using General Lee's report of the Harper's Ferry raid, students might cite the following quote from the report. The plan was the attempt of a fanatic or madman. While certainly a valid claim, teachers will want to push students to consider additional evidence as a way of understanding alternative interpretations of John Brown. In this way, students might be asked to consider less dismissive accounts of John Brown's intentions. Instead, they might consider a counterclaim that John Brown was an abolitionist and believed so strongly in his convictions that his actions at Harper's Ferry, while fanatical to some, moved the emancipation conversation forward in this country. Students might read the lyrics to the war song, John Brown's Body, and consider the chorus about Brown moldering in the grave while his soul keeps marching on. As you can see, you play a critical role in helping your students develop strong argumentation skills. It is not enough to simply comprehend a historical source. While all sources that are included within the John Brown investigation are individually interesting, students are interpreting them with a larger purpose in mind. They are reading them in the service of the compelling question, what is John Brown's legacy? In this way, we create meaning and context for students' work. More importantly, students more closely mirror the work of historians. Challenge your students to think more like historians the next time you tackle a compelling question in your classroom.